Imagine this scenario. The Dallas Cowboys walk into the 2026 NFL Draft in Pittsburgh with two first-round picks, number 12 and number 20, and a defense that was the worst scoring unit in the entire National Football League last season. They need a pass rusher. They need one badly. They missed on Max Crosby, they got Rashawn Gary, but Gary alone is not the answer they need, and every person inside Valley Ranch knows it. Now imagine that before the Cowboys even walk up to the draft podium on April 23rd, the phone rings. Minnesota is calling, and on the other end of that phone is a deal that gives Dallas one of the best pass rushers in football, a 28-year-old Pro Bowl caliber edge rusher with 24.5 sacks over his last two healthy seasons, while still leaving the Cowboys holding a first-round pick in the top 20. Pick 12 goes to Minneapolis, and Dallas falls back to pick 18, but they are not empty-handed. Jonathan Grenard is coming to Texas, and the Cowboys' defense, the unit that allowed more points than any team in franchise history last season, just got a whole lot more dangerous. This is not fantasy. This is not a made-up scenario for content clicks. This is a real, documented, reported trade possibility that has been percolating since early March that involves a connection between the Cowboys' own coaching staff and Grenard that almost nobody is talking about, and that could fundamentally reshape the NFC East power structure before a single combine drill of the 2026 season is forgotten. If you want the full story, all the context, all the history, all the chess pieces, and all the reasons why this trade makes explosive sense for Dallas right now, subscribe right now, ring that bell, and let's get into it. To understand why the Jonathan Grenard trade conversation is so compelling for the Dallas Cowboys, you need to understand how the Cowboys arrived at this moment, because nothing about the last 12 months of this franchise's history has been anything close to normal. It started last August of 2025, when Jerry Jones made one of the most stunning transactions in recent NFL history. He traded Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons, the two-time Defensive Player of the Year, the most dominant individual defensive talent in Dallas Cowboys history since the days of DeMarcus Ware, the player who was supposed to be the cornerstone of the defense for the next decade, gone to the Green Bay Packers in a blockbuster deal that brought back two first-round picks, numbers 12 and 20 in the 2026 draft, in exchange for the player who will now be wearing a Packers uniform when that same draft happens in Pittsburgh. Every move Jerry Jones has made on defense since that transaction has been an attempt to replace what Micah Parsons gave them, and nothing has come close. Jadeveon Clowney, who arrived late last September after going unsigned for weeks, put together a legitimately impressive season with 8.5 sacks in just 13 games. But Clowney is 33 years old, and the Cowboys' new defensive coordinator, Christian Parker, did not appear interested in bringing him back for 2026. James Houston contributed in a rotation role, but the edge room entering this offseason was, by any honest assessment, thin, undersized, and nowhere near capable of generating the consistent pressure on the quarterback that separates playoff teams from playoff contenders. The Cowboys' defense allowed 30.1 points per game last season, the second worst total in 66 years of Dallas Cowboys football. They ranked 32nd in the league in points allowed, dead last, behind everyone. And so the off-season mission was not subtle. Jerry Jones said it himself in his characteristic, unfiltered way: bust the budget, fix the defense, however it takes. Jones restructured Terrence Steele's contract to create $13 million in cap space. He went hard after Max Crosby, reportedly offering the 12th overall pick, a future second-round selection, and a veteran player. The Raiders shook on it. Dallas thought they had their man, and then the Baltimore Ravens came with 2 first-round picks, and the Crosby deal fell apart for the Cowboys before the ink was dry. when Trey Hendrickson, the two-time NFL sack leader, who was widely considered the best pass rusher available in free agency, also went to Baltimore on a 4-year, $120 million deal that Dallas simply could not or would not match, the Cowboys pivoted. Rashawn Gary came from Green Bay for a 2027 fourth-round pick. Smart deal, good player, real value, but not the transformative addition that the defense requires to go from historically bad to legitimately dangerous. And that brings us to Jonathan Grenard, and to a trade possibility that, the more you dig into it, the more you realize is sitting right in front of the Cowboys if they are willing to see it clearly. Adam Schefter of ESPN broke the story in early March in his unmistakable, nothing superfluous, just the facts style that the Minnesota Vikings were open to trading Pro Bowl edge rusher Jonathan Grenard. The reasons were specific and financial. The Vikings, despite having one of the top 3 defenses in the NFL last season, were dealing with salary cap constraints that made Grenard's $19 million annual salary complicated to carry heading into 2026, particularly since Grenard himself was seeking a significant raise, reportedly in the range of $30 million per year, and Minnesota was not yet in a position to give him that. The result was an open, documented trade conversation that immediately set the phones ringing across every pass-rush-hungry building in the league. The Colts called. The Eagles called. The Seahawks reportedly had interest. Multiple NFC teams with defensive line needs started running the math on what it would cost to bring in a 28-year-old Pro Bowl caliber edge rusher still squarely in the prime of his career. And right there in the middle of that list of interested parties, right where you would expect to find them, right where the need is loudest and the competitive desperation is most acute, were the Dallas Cowboys. But before we talk about the trade mechanics and the pick 12 to pick 18 scenario that has analysts buzzing, you need to understand who Jonathan Grenard actually is. Because the casual NFL fan might know his name without fully appreciating what he represents as a pass rushing talent, and without understanding why the Cowboys' connection to him runs deeper than just need and availability. Grenard came out of Florida in the 3rd round of the 2020 NFL Draft, far lower than his talent deserved, owing primarily to an injury history in college that gave teams pause. He went to the Houston Texans and spent 4 seasons developing, year after year, showing more ability, more technique, more explosiveness off the snap than anyone expected from a 3rd-round pick. In 2023, in his final season in Houston before becoming a free agent, he posted 13 sacks and 52 tackles and announced himself to the league as something much more than a developmental depth piece. He was a genuine starter, a genuine playmaker, a genuine threat. The Vikings saw it and signed him to a 4-year, $76 million contract, $9.5 million per season in the first year of the deal's structure, and Grenard rewarded that faith immediately and emphatically in 2024. 12.5 sacks, 59 tackles, 4 forced fumbles, 18 tackles for loss, 22 quarterback hits, a Pro Bowl selection. Those are not just good numbers. Those are the numbers of one of the 5 best pass rushers in the entire National Football League. He was the centerpiece of a Minnesota defense that finished as the 3rd-ranked unit in football. He replaced Danielle Hunter, who had been the backbone of the Vikings pass rush for nearly a decade, and did not just replace him adequately, he replaced him emphatically, at a lower cost, at a younger age, with arguably more upside still ahead of him. And then 2025 happened. A shoulder injury cost him meaningful game time, limited him to 12 games, required season-ending surgery in December. He managed only 3 sacks in those 12 games. The production cratered.
The contract suddenly looked complicated relative to the salary cap reality, and the Vikings, balancing the financial demands of keeping Grenard at $30 million a year against the reality that young edge rusher Dallas Turner, their 2024 first-round pick, was entering his third season and ready for more responsibility, found themselves in the uncomfortable position of being open to moving a player they would very much prefer to keep. That is the situation the Cowboys are walking into. An elite pass rusher, a shoulder injury that required surgery, but that every evaluator believes is fully correctable and not the kind of structural issue that ends careers or fundamentally diminishes ability. A contract that is manageable, $18.4 million in guaranteed salary for 2026, with no additional guaranteed money after this season, making him not just an elite player, but one of the most financially friendly elite players available in the entire trade market. And a player who, not coincidentally,
This is not a speculative connection. It is a documented coaching relationship that directly reduces the onboarding risk of a trade. When you bring in a veteran pass rusher from another team, there is always an adjustment period, a learning curve around scheme, around technique, around the specific vocabulary and concepts that a new defensive coordinator uses. For Grenard and the Cowboys, that adjustment period is reduced to almost nothing. Dixon already speaks his language. Dixon already knows what he can do. The integration would be immediate, natural, and efficient in a way that it simply would not be for any other team acquiring Grenard from the outside. The Cowboys Wire at USA Today was the first outlet to formally publish the specific trade proposal that is now circulated widely enough to become the dominant trade scenario in the Dallas draft conversation. The Cowboys send pick 12 to the Minnesota Vikings and drop back to pick 18 in the first round. In exchange, they receive Jonathan Grenard, plus, in some versions of the proposal, additional draft compensation in the second round to soften the gap. It is a deal that makes a specific kind of mathematical and strategic sense for both franchises that rewards careful examination. From the Cowboys' perspective, the trade converts one of their 2 first-round picks, a pick that, at number 12, might yield a very good player who contributes starting in year 2 or 3, into an elite, proven, in-his-prime edge rusher who contributes immediately starting in week 1 of 2026. In a division where the Philadelphia Eagles are defending Super Bowl champions, where the Washington Commanders are aggressive and dangerous, where the New York Giants are rebuilding with first-year talent, the Cowboys do not have the luxury of drafting for the future at number 12 and waiting 2 years for that pick to develop into the playmaker they need. They need production now. They need a pass rush now. They need the defensive identity that Grenard represents now in 2026, in a season where the window with Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and George Pickens is wide open but not infinite. And, critically, the Cowboys are not walking away from the draft empty-handed in this scenario. They still have pick 20. Pick 20 was always going to be their second swing in the first round, and it remains intact regardless of what happens with the Grenard trade. But in the version of this deal that analysts have been circulating most aggressively, the Cowboys do not even drop to pick 20. They drop to pick 18. The Vikings trade pick 18 back to Dallas as part of the compensation package, giving the Cowboys a first-round selection that is only 6 spots lower than the one they are giving up. They get a Pro Bowl edge rusher, and they retain a top 20 pick. That is not a lateral move dressed up as a trade. That is a genuine win-now maneuver that addresses the most critical need on this roster while preserving meaningful draft capital for the future. Now, let us examine this from Minnesota's perspective. Because the Vikings didn't get to be the third-ranked defense in football by making poorly considered personnel decisions. Kevin O'Connell and interim general manager Rob Brzezinski are intelligent football people who are navigating a genuine financial constraint with their eyes open. They would prefer to keep Grenard. O'Connell said it plainly at the owners' meetings in Phoenix. "Yeah, I expect him to be part of our team." But he also left the door open. "I know there's always conversations," he said. "We're always going to try to do what's best for our team and also what we think is best for each one of our individual players." That is the language of a coach who knows a deal is possible, who knows the price point exists, who knows that if the right offer arrives before the draft, the right offer will be considered. What the Vikings want is a premium return. Multiple reporters, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, The Athletic's Alec Lewis, Viking territory analysts, all confirmed that Minnesota's asking price for Grenard was a day 2 pick, with some preferring a second-round selection and others suggesting a third could work if sweetened with additional picks. The Vikings want that day 2 capital to build depth behind Grenard's departure, to maintain their defensive quality even without their best pass rusher, and to position themselves for continued competitiveness in an NFC that is becoming increasingly crowded at the top. In the Cowboys version of this trade, pick 12 going to the Vikings while Dallas drops to pick 18 and picks up Grenard, Minnesota is getting significant value. A top 15 pick in the first round is not a day 2 pick. It is substantially better. It is the kind of return that allows the Vikings to stay aggressive in this draft, to take a pass rusher of their own if one is available, to address their offensive needs around Kyler Murray, and to reload for 2027 and beyond with real assets rather than mid-round hopes. And, critically, there is one more dimension of this equation that makes the timing particularly interesting. Keldrick Falk, the Auburn edge rusher who is expected to be drafted somewhere in the mid to late first round of 2026. If the Vikings, sitting at pick 18, see Falk available and take him as their next franchise edge rusher, the entire calculation around Grenard changes instantly. You don't need to keep Grenard when your replacement is sitting in your draft room ready to be called to the podium. The moment Falk is in a purple jersey, Grenard becomes dramatically more available. The Vikings have Andrew Van Ginkel as a proven veteran piece and Turner as the developing former first-round investment. With Falk in the mix, keeping Grenard at $19 million a year while paying a new first-round pick his rookie deal becomes an unjustifiable luxury. The trade happens, the Cowboys get their man, and Dallas, still armed with pick 20, walks out of the first round with a Pro Bowl pass rusher, a top 20 draft pick, and a defensive front that looks completely different from the one that spent all of 2025 getting embarrassed on national television.
Let us talk about what Dallas gets at pick 18 or 20 even if Grenard arrives and the draft unfolds as analysts currently project. Because one of the narratives floating around the Cowboys' Grenard trade discussion is that by dropping from 12 to 18, Dallas is somehow missing out on a transformative player who would have made the defense better than Grenard could. That argument does not hold up under scrutiny. At pick 12, without the trade, the Cowboys are most frequently projected to take either a cornerback, Tennessee's Jermod McCoy is a name that appears in mock draft after mock draft, connecting Dallas at 12, or a linebacker prospect who can address the glaring middle of the defense need that Jerry Jones himself acknowledged at the owners' meetings. At pick 18 in the trade scenario, both McCoy and multiple linebacker options are likely still on the board. The drop from 12 to 18 is 6 spots. In a draft class that multiple analysts have described as one of the thinner first-round talent pools in recent years, 6 spots is not the canyon it would be in a deep class. The same player the Cowboys would take at 12 is often available at 18, and if he is not, the next best option at the position is frequently close enough in quality that the trade value math still overwhelmingly favors getting greener than the deal. And think about what the Cowboys' defense looks like with this trade completed. Rashawn Gary on one edge, the man who spent the last 3 seasons posting a combined 24 sacks for the Green Bay Packers, who brings familiarity with Christian Parker's scheme from their shared time in Green Bay, who is entering what should be the peak of his pass rushing prime at 28 years old. Jonathan Grenard on the other edge, 28 years old himself, coming off a fully rehabbed shoulder, operating in a system installed by the coach who has known his game better than anyone for years, motivated by the fact that he is playing on the final guaranteed year of his contract, and every sack he posts this season is an argument for the $30 million extension he wants. Quinnen Williams and Kenny Clark inside, two of the most physically dominant interior defensive linemen in the conference, commanding double teams on every passing down that make the one-on-one matchups for Gary and Greenard easier than they would be otherwise. Donovan Eziraku, the 2025 first-round pick, who missed all of OTAs and minicamp with a hip injury, but who brings genuine upside and youth to the rotation once healthy. And behind all of them, a secondary rebuilt this offseason with Jalen Thompson, P.J. Locke, Kobe Durant, pieces assembled specifically to function in Parker's multiple scheme. That is a defense. That is a real, competitive, legitimately dangerous defense that would take this Cowboys team from a 32nd ranked defensive disaster into an upper-tier unit capable of making the plays that win games in January. Gary and Greenard as a pass rush tandem would immediately rank among the best edge combinations in the NFC, not potentially in 2 years if they develop, immediately in Week 1 against the division rival Philadelphia Eagles in what will almost certainly be the biggest opening game the Cowboys have played in years. Two elite, experienced, contract-motivated pass rushers, one on each side of the formation, one coached by a man who built his game, one scheme familiar from his time in Green Bay, hunting quarterbacks together in a building that has not had a legitimate defensive identity since the days of DeMarcus Ware and Jason Hatcher. Now, let's be honest about the risk, because no trade is without it, and no analysis of this move is complete without acknowledging what could go wrong. Greenard's shoulder. The surgery was in December of 2025. That is approximately 4 months before training camp opens. Shoulder surgeries at the edge rusher position are not always simple or clean in their recovery. The torque that a pass rusher puts through his shoulder on every
Because that is ultimately what this trade is about. Not just about pass rushing, not just about the difference between a corner or a linebacker drafted at pick 12 versus Greenard coming in via trade. It is about what Jerry Jones owes this roster. CeeDee Lamb is arguably the best wide receiver in football right now. He is 23 years old. George Pickens, in his first season in Dallas, showed exactly the kind of elite playmaking ability that makes defensive coordinators panic. Dak Prescott, healthy and surrounded by weapons, is capable of carrying an offense to a Super Bowl. This Cowboys roster, on the offensive side of the ball, is not a rebuild project. It is not a team that needs 2 more years to develop. It is a team that is ready to win right now, that was held back from winning in 2025 by a defense that was historically terrible, and that cannot afford another year of defensive incompetence while the window on its offensive window gradually narrows. And Jonathan Greenard, coming to Dallas with his Pro Bowl ability and his chip-on-the-shoulder contract motivation and his deep familiarity with the coach who will be developing his game in Parker's scheme, he is not just a defensive piece. He is the signal that this franchise is finally willing to match the seriousness of its offensive investment with equivalent defensive seriousness. That it learned from 2025, that it understands what it takes to be a complete team, that it is done with the approach that led to pick 12 sitting in the hands of a franchise that used to have Micah Parsons and is now staring at the empty space where the best defensive player in the NFC used to play. Kevin O'Connell said he expects Greenard to be on the Vikings roster, but he also said there are always conversations. There are conversations now. There will be more conversations in the days and weeks before April 23rd, when the draft begins in Pittsburgh. And every day that passes without a contract extension agreement between Greenard and the Vikings, every day that Dallas Turner continues to develop, every day that the draft approaches and first-round capital becomes more immediately actionable, the trade becomes more possible, not less. The Cowboys are positioned perfectly for this deal. They have the pick the Vikings want. They have the coaching connection that makes the acquisition smoother than it would be for any other franchise. They have the offensive roster that demands a defensive upgrade to be taken seriously as a contender. And they have the owner who, for all his flaws and all the times his competitive fire has gotten ahead of his football judgment, is also the man who stares at the word mediocre and refuses absolute
absolutely to accept it. Pick 12 to Minneapolis, Jonathan Greenard to Dallas. Pick 18 or 20 at worst, still in the Cowboys' hands. The draft happens, the defense improves, the season begins, and the conversation about whether this Cowboys team can finally put together the two-sided roster that wins championships in January is a conversation about real possibilities rather than theoretical ones. Stay locked in, because whatever happens in Pittsburgh, whether this trade gets done before the first round begins, on draft night itself, or whether the Cowboys take a different path entirely, this story is one of the most compelling roster decisions in the entire NFL right now. And we will be here for every development, every update, and every twist until it resolves. This video is based on publicly available reports, verified news sources, insider accounts, documented trade proposals, and reported industry conversations as of April 2026. All trade scenarios, compensation structures, and strategic analyses cited represent the reported views of NFL analysts, journalists, and team insiders, and do not reflect confirmed or finalized transactions. Contract figures and draft pick values are drawn from publicly reported sources. This content is produced for informational and entertainment purposes only.